Welcome to the Jeffco DeAngelis Foundation podcast series focusing on school safety and security. My name is Kevin Carroll, Executive Director for the Foundation. Throughout this series, we will be engaging in informative conversations with local, national, and even internationally recognized experts in the arena of school safety. We will be exploring best practices in crisis preparation, response, and recovery, as well as gleaning lessons learned from these remarkable professionals. In special editions like today's with Ken and Jill Fellman, we will also be having conversations with people who have personal life experiences with school and community leadership and can provide insight into leading during times of crisis. The Jeffco DeAngelis Foundation originated in Jefferson County, Colorado, with a deep passion for and a relentless commitment to sharing best practices in school safety and security with first responders, as well as school and school district personnel. We, in partnership with Jefferson County Public Schools, support a one-of-a-kind training facility, the Frank DeAngelis Center for Community Safety. This former elementary school is now a premier training facility which has supported training for over 7,200 first responders. Our trainings encompass everything from the practical to the tactical, focusing on proven approaches to preparedness, response, and recovery. More can be learned about the training facility, our team of nationally recognized trainers, and the foundation by visiting www.deangeliscenter.org. And with that, it's my true pleasure to welcome our special guests today, Ken and Jill Fellman. Ken is a partner with the law firm Kissinger and Fellman and served as mayor of Arvada, Colorado from 1999 to 2007. Jill is a long-term educator who, after retiring, chose to continue to share her leadership expertise by becoming a school board member for Jeffco Schools in 2013. As you will soon hear, Ken and Jill both bring a broad range of experiences and expertise to the table for this conversation about leadership and crisis management. Welcome, Ken and Jill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Ken and Jill, I'd like to start by giving our listeners a little bit more information about your background. How did you get to the leadership roles that you attained, kind of your pathway towards those before we get into the main content?
Well, for me, it was all about teaching and learning and kids, and that's my heart, my soul, and my passion. So I was a teacher, I was an administrator. I truly believe that all kids can and must learn math. I mean, that was a real obvious thing for me. After I retired, I almost said after I graduated, I tried to reinvent myself and kept on coming back to what I love, and that is teaching and learning. I read a lot of scholarship applications for a lot of organizations like the Red Rocks Community College Foundation, the Super Credit Union Foundation, Jeffco Schools Foundation, just to, I think it's so important to help kids find their passion, find their heart and soul, find their path. So that's been my life's work.
So being in education is really kind of like a calling.
Oh, it
right?
was. It was. It was deep in my
space,
it was
right?
deep in my soul.
Yeah. Wonderful. Math, you said, math teacher.
It was. I was a math teacher forever. Yeah, and I really believe that it's important for kids to realize math is not just a four-letter word. It is something that we can problem solve and help us think and help us organize our mind in different ways. And I will always believe that. I think that's important for teachers and kids to know mathematics in many different ways.
And then how you made the leap from that to wanting to be a school board member. Talk about that.
When I ran for school board, there was not an educator on the board. And that is so critical. Someone who can say, I understand the system and we need to, no, there's not a perfect system in the world.
Sure.
Good heavens, I love Jeffco. And I still knew that there were things to make better within the system. And that's why I did that. There was a need for an educator to look at, how kids how kids learn. In my mind, it's all about kids. It's all about teaching and learning, and there wasn't that voice.
Knowing what it's like to be at the district level, because you served in that way,
Sure.
and then also being in a school to help with
Absolutely.
that broader decision making.
Right.
It's not like it is on TV or the movies, is it?
No, not quite.
Yeah. And Ken, how about you?
Well, I most of my life's work, my vocation and avocation, has been involved in public policy and government, and eventually it led me to local government. Back when I was in college, even before that, I remember my family was relatively politically active. I'm a child of the Vietnam era and Watergate, and was, I think, impacted by some of those things that were happening during my youth. And when I got to college, I had an opportunity to do an internship on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. And I was fortunate to have been assigned by chance, actually, to work for someone who was then a freshman congressman from the suburbs of Denver named Tim Worth. And Tim became my political mentor to this day, still a great friend. And I learned a lot from him, but it also exposed me, as somebody who grew up on the East Coast, to Western people and Western issues. And it encouraged me when I applied to law school to look to go to school in one of the Western states. And I ended up here at the University of Denver and stayed active, or became active again, in some political issues through Tim Worth's campaigns, and then got to work for Governor Lamb while I was in law school. And eventually I ran for the legislature when I was 26 years old. I did not win that election, although I met Jill during the campaign, so it was actually
It worked out.
it was a double win. I didn't have to
win.
serve in the legislature,
There you
and Jill and I got together. So, but through that, I eventually got a focus on local government. And first, through my law practice, I started working with municipalities and counties, and it fascinated me because it really was the closest level, is the closest level of government to the people that it impacts. Most people know that if they want to call their senator, or call their congressman, or call their governor, or send an email, they're going to get a staff person who might respond to them.
Yeah.
But you see the mayor in the grocery store or at the post office, and you can engage with your local officials. And after Jill and I moved to Arvada, I was encouraged to apply for a position on the Planning Commission, and that led to running for city council and eventually running for mayor. So, I had close to 20 years of service in appointed or elected positions in Arvada, and then continued to grow that part of my law practice, where to this day most of my clients are cities and towns and counties, regional governmental organizations in Colorado and all over the country. So I'm a local government guy, and I've been fortunate. I've been fortunate to be able to earn a living in an area of impacting public policy with the kind of people I love to work with.
So both of you in that kind of servant leadership role for your local communities, and broader than that as well. We're going to get back to that, how you both have a commitment to something bigger. So we'll come back to that. But you both have led in times of crisis. And you recently had a personal experience that may give us insight into the importance of intentional leadership. I understand that you took a trip that turned out to be more than you bargained for. And I'd like to talk about it first from a personal experience lens, and then second from a leadership lens. So if you could walk us back a few months to your trip.
Sure. So there are really high highs and really low lows in this part of the story that we sometimes call Jill and Ken's excellent adventure, or bizarrely traumatic adventure, depending upon which part of the trip it was. We had been planning for many months a 3-week trip to South America. And the plan was to fly to Santiago, Chile, spend a few days there, and then get on a cruise ship and head south along the Chilean coast and go to the tip of South America, Tierra del Fuego, and sail around Cape Horn and visit the Falkland Islands, and then up the coast of Argentina and finish in Buenos Aires, and then we were going to spend a few days in Buenos Aires before flying home. We left on March 1st, and it's fair to say that the first 13 days of our vacation were spectacular. We should probably say, too, at least as far as what we've been able to tell, there were no reported cases of the COVID virus in South America when we left here on March 1st. And people were starting to talk about some problems, and there was the Princess cruise ship that was stuck in Japan, but it was apparently safe.
A lot of unknowns too,
or
right?
So,
And
right,
assumptions
right,
about
or so
safety at
they
that
said,
time.
to fly to South America and visit South America. So the first part of the trip, as I mentioned, was great. We went around the Cape. We visited the Falkland Islands, spent a very cold but wonderful day hanging out with penguins. And then we were supposed to visit a port called Puerto Madryn in Argentina on the Patagonia on the Argentinian side. And they turned us away. They were starting to see cases of the coronavirus in parts of South America. They turned our ship away. We had 2 more stops after that were planned, one in Montevideo, Uruguay, and then in Buenos Aires. Montevideo turned us away. We went to Buenos Aires. Now, we were supposed to, when the cruise ended, spend a few days in a hotel before flying home on March 21st. On March 19th, the Argentinian government let people get off the ship if they were going straight to the airport with a confirmed flight.
Oh,
But of
okay.
course, we weren't.
You're going to be in the hotel.
So
right?
some people got off the ship. We stayed on the ship. There a little bit more than half of the passengers, a little over 1,000 people, remained on the ship. And that evening, the Argentinian government decided that they were going to close their borders. Anyone that was in the harbor was going to be stuck there for a minimum of 2 weeks. So they
Quarantined.
they hightailed it out of the harbor. Checked again to see if the Uruguay government would let people fly home from Montevideo. The answer was no. And it took a little while to decide, but eventually at first they said, we're just going to sail to Florida. We'll take everybody to Florida. So they started heading north, and when they got to Rio, they stopped and sat in the harbor for a few hours and said, we're working on a deal where the Brazilian government may let people fly home from Rio. And after a few hours of sitting there, they came back and said, nope, they won't let you in. So we're off to Florida. And it was interesting because the feeling at the time, even though this was basically extending a trip for 2 weeks, now it was like we already should have been home by now, and now we have 2 more weeks left on the ship.
At least if anybody will take you. Right.
Right. Well, we thought, all right, these South American governments don't care about us, but we're going to go to Florida. Our government will take care of us. Ha, ha, ha.
Yeah, maybe
We'll talk
not.
about that in a minute.
Yeah.
We thought, and it appeared that everyone was healthy at that point. And we were emailing and calling with our friends and family back home. And they were all, at this point, they're all stuck in their houses. And they're saying, enjoy yourselves. You know, we're stuck in the house. You guys can go to the pool. You can go to the bar. You can go to a show at night. You can go out to dinner with your friends. Have fun. And so that little third piece of our trip, after a week of not knowing what was going to happen, which created some stress but wasn't too bad, the third part was, all right, we've got an extra 2 weeks. We're going to relax and have a good time. And we kept sailing north. The weather was nice. We crossed the equator, which is always a big advantage for sailors. And when we got about a week out, they told us, I should back up. A lot of people probably heard there was a Holland America ship. We were on a Princess ship, the Coral Princess. There was a Holland America ship that was in the news that had people that were sick with the COVID virus, and they were heading to Fort Lauderdale. And they were a few days ahead of us. And we all thought, and we were given the understanding from the ship's crew that they're going to get to Fort Lauderdale and they're going to figure out what the protocols are with the government for people to get off the ship, who was going to be off and who was not because of the illness. And then we were going to skate in right behind them,
all ready for
and
you,
we
right?
know what the
Everything in
rules were.
place.
Right. Again, the best laid
quite.
plans. So we're about a week out. We're just getting into the Caribbean, and they announce that there's been a higher than normal incidence on the ship of people with flu-like symptoms So we're going to start doing social distancing. That was on a Tuesday morning. Within 4 or 5 hours, they came back and said, no, there's too many people that are sick. You're all quarantined to your rooms. So at this point now, we're in the room. We can't leave our rooms. Fortunately, we had a balcony, so we could at least get a little bit of fresh air. Couldn't go out to eat. They would give you menus where they would bang on the door and there would be a tray of food. It's amazing how great the food is on a cruise ship when you can eat in the dining room, and how
You pick
awful
whatever
it
you
is.
want and you can...
How awful the same food tastes when it's delivered to your door. Couldn't get, they didn't have people come in and take care of your room. You would leave dirty towels in a bag outside. They would drop off clean towels for you. Everyone was given a mask, and you were supposed to put your mask on before you opened the door to pick something up that the crew was leaving for you. At first, they refilled people's medications because obviously we had 2 more weeks that wasn't planned. And then as we got a little bit closer, you started hearing things like the governor of Florida saying, we don't want these cruise ships coming in here. They're going to take away resources from Floridians.
Everybody's trying to protect their own, right?
And we got close to Fort Lauderdale, and all of a sudden the authorities in Fort Lauderdale said, we don't want any more cruise ships. You're not coming in. So we sat around trying to figure out what to do, and eventually went to Miami. And while some people got off over the course of the next few days, it took 4 days for them to get us off the ship. I know we'll talk more about that, the details in a little while, but it was incredibly stressful. It was the last part was traumatic. We ran out of medications for the last 3 days, and they would, despite our requests, they did not refill them for us. So we were without medications. It was hard to tell whether you were feeling the way you were feeling because you were ill or because you were just
had your medicine,
stressed
right?
because of medication, because of the stress and the trauma and the not knowing. And I know we're going to talk about communications here in a little bit more detail, but it was that last week was probably one of the worst experiences that either one of us have ever been through.
How about Jill, from your perspective?
It was just so unbelievable to see people taken off the ship in a stretcher. We didn't know if they were sick or if they had died. We had heard that people were sick and dying on our boat through social media. And to see people, to see that, where they had stretchers and ambulances, and you didn't know what was happening. And that was incredibly weird. It was just heartbreaking. And again, I was cutting our pills up and, because we didn't have what we needed. And we kept on Saturday. We got there on a Saturday and they said, have your luggage outside. Have only what you need for carry on. And so we did that. Well, 2 days later, they gave it back to us and said, you'll need more of this.
Yeah, because you're not getting off.
So we didn't, you didn't know. You didn't know. At that time, they said the process, the priority was to get the sick and dying people off the boat. And then we want to get the Floridians off the boat. And then we'll, at this time, there was still a large amount of folks from Britain, a large amount of folks from Canada, a large amount of folks from Australia. So there was still a very international group, and you didn't know, how are we going to get home? And at that point, we didn't know when we were going to dock, so we rented cars in like a variety of different
so that you could go
days
off, right?
in different in different companies, because we figured, hey, if we have to drive 30 hours, we will. We want to get home.
One of our friends had told us, one of our friends in the States, a week or so out, said, we don't know if they're going to stop domestic airfare in the U.S. So you might get to Florida and then not have a way to get home. So we actually had 3 days in a row where we had a car rented or reserved rental car from 3 different companies just in case. It was, and that all that stuff kind of led or built up the trauma and the anxiety of not knowing. And
you say, well, you were only a week. It was only a week. But oh my
It felt like
goodness, when you
forever.
sit there and you don't know what's happening for day to day, you lose your focus, you feel like you're in this fog. I couldn't read. I couldn't, I mean, we couldn't watch TV. The only TV, the news they had on the boat, we had MSNBC and Fox News. So you had two very extreme news stations. And
You're
you
getting
didn't
bits and
know if
pieces
you
from
were
social
getting,
media. You're getting bits and pieces from your friends. But
it was just, it was incredible. It
Yeah.
was the worst week of my life.
sounds like you were also getting some bits and pieces from some crew members, but maybe not formal information that might have been helpful, which kind of shifts us a little bit into our next part of our conversation. So you both, as leaders, you've had time to reflect on all of this and what happened. What steps were taken that you feel were executed well, and what missteps were taken that should be avoided in the future? So leaders thinking about leading in times of crisis when there is such anxiety and such unknown factors.
Yeah. Well, we go back. We've had this discussion amongst the two of us and with some of our friends many times since this experience. We've both had some level of training in crisis management for organizations. And one of the things that we are taught, and I know this applies in the public education, the school setting, is that in times of crisis, you over-communicate. You don't under-communicate. People need to know what's going on. Even if you don't know what's going on,
They say I don't know.
Yes, let people know what you're doing to try to find out what you need to know, because the uncertainty and the lack of communication just leads to, people to speculate of the wide range of things that might be happening. And of course, many people will speculate to the worst case scenario, and that just increases the tension and the stress and the anxiety. We felt like most of the ship's crew, the sort of people we interacted with on a daily basis, they did their darndest to help us, and they were under a tremendous amount of stress. These are young people who come from all parts of the world who are on this ship because they can make more money working on a cruise ship and being away from their families for 4 months at a time than they can in their home countries. And a lot of them were supposed to go home after this cruise, and they didn't know. So they were wonderful. And they dealt with us in a positive way despite the fears and the anxiety that they had. The captain and the senior management leadership on the ship was terrible. I have no idea what their training was, but we didn't get a lot of communication. The communication that we did get was often vague. It was rarely, if ever, followed up with in a timely manner. Even when they said that they were going to follow up at a certain time, they rarely did. And again, we know now that they knew things that they could have told us and waited until they told us. As Jill mentioned, we learned that people had died on our ship on social media 6 hours before the captain told us. That's almost criminally negligent in my mind.
So a lot of those details that you gave us at the beginning in talking about we couldn't get into this port, we couldn't do that, it was probably came after as opposed to getting that information all along the way.
When we were in that earlier part of the cruise where we started getting turned away from ports, they would tell us. They would say, we just found out we're not able to get to this port. We're going to have an extra day at sea. We don't know yet what the status is at the next one. We'll let you know. That was kind of okay. What was also happening at that time, though, interestingly, was that the direct flights from South America, or I should say from Argentina to the United States, were being canceled. So we were supposed to fly home on Delta Airlines from Buenos Aires to Atlanta and then Atlanta to Denver. And we got a notice, and we booked our flights through the cruise line, through Princess, so they had the obligation to communicate with us. We didn't hear from the cruise line. We got a notice from Delta that said, your flight's been canceled. And we called Delta and said, well, what are you going to do? Are you rebooking us in some other route? What? And they said, well, since you paid for it through the cruise line has to do it. So we called the cruise line and said, what's going on? We're working on it. Well, why did I have to call them and say, what's going on. And then it was like every couple of days, they were like, sir, just be patient. We're working on it. And eventually, a few days later, we got a note from Delta first, before the cruise line told us, that said, you've been rebooked. You're going to fly from Buenos Aires to Sao Paulo, Brazil, and from Sao Paulo to Atlanta, and from Atlanta to Denver. Eventually, that got canceled too. But the point was, we were hearing about this from another source before we heard about it from the cruise ship, and the cruise ship knew about it.
And you were in their care
exactly
at the time,
exactly.
Right?
So we had that issue. We had what was happening on the ship with the level of the death and the illnesses that we weren't hearing about. We got in touch about, I don't remember the exact number of days. It was probably 10 or so days before we eventually got off the ship. And we got in touch with Senator Bennett's office, and Congressman Perlmutter is our congressman in his office. And I give credit to both of those gentlemen. They both contacted us personally. We spoke with both of them, but their staffs were great. And they didn't have an easy time getting information, but they were trying to squeeze information out of the corporate office from Princess Cruises, from the command center in South Florida, which involved the local authorities in Broward County, in Miami-Dade County when we were in Miami, the CDC, the Coast Guard. And one of the problems was our government was so ineptly unprepared to handle repatriation of citizens that the rules kept changing. And we wouldn't hear, what we would hear from the cruise line, I'll fast forward to now we're in Miami and we're trying to get off the ship. And they would say, we're trying to arrange your flights home and we'll let you know tomorrow if you're going to go. So we would wake up in the morning saying, well, when are we going to hear from the ship? I wonder, this was at the same time where remember they took our luggage, as Jill told us, so maybe we're going to leave today. And we'd wait and we'd wait and we'd wait and get to be about 3 o'clock and we'd be thinking, I guess we're not going home today. And then you'd get frustrated about that. I wonder why. And 8 or 9 o'clock at night, you'd get the captain would come on and say, well, we were successfully able to have 125 people leave the ship today. And for the rest of you, we're working on it and we'll be back in touch
number's not up yet.
tomorrow. Yeah. Well, when are you going to tell us tomorrow? And then the next day, same thing, like rinse and repeat. And you wait and you wait and you wait, and they don't tell you that you're not going. These people are going today. This is what they should have done, because we want to have this discussion in the context of crisis management. They should have been in touch with us every morning and said, a certain number of people are going to be able to leave today. They've already been notified. If you haven't been notified, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to leave today, but we are working on your flight and we will get. That never happened. What happened was 8 or 9 o'clock that night, they would come back and it would basically the message was, well, it sucks to be you. You know, you didn't get off today, but these other people did, and we'll let you know. So we were fortunate enough, again, through other sources. One of my law partners had a friend in Miami who had contacts with the Miami-Dade police. And the local police were escorting every bus to the airport because they wanted to make sure, the CDC wanted to make sure that you went right from the cruise ship to your flight. And that meant the police had a list with names on it of who is leaving the ship today and who's right. So we occasionally could find out through this attorney who had contacts in the PD and say, unfortunately, you're not on it today. The ship never told us that. We just, at 9 o'clock that night, they would say, guess you didn't get off today, you know, maybe tomorrow. When we finally were able to go home, we learned about our flight, where it was going to go, you know, what the stops were. The night before we left, April 6th, and we learned about it from Michael Bennett's office. The cruise line didn't tell us till the next morning when at 6 a.m. they banged on our door and slid a piece of paper under our door with the information. Now, imagine the sense of relief when you know we're finally going home. They knew it the night before. Yeah. Why didn't they tell us?
They should have. They slipped it under your door.
This whole example just of what we lived through, and we were in touch with some of our fellow passengers who we had become friends with or were friends with before the cruise, and we were communicating with them every day. It was great. We had this little support group because every time somebody was freaking out, you could call one of your friends and they would walk you off the ledge or talk you off the ledge rather. And we were constantly kind of going back and forth with this thing as to when are we going to leave and how are we going to get off. It turned out we ended up all pretty much leaving on on the same day, but you could feel the stress that other people were experiencing also with the unknown. And in hindsight now, it wouldn't have made it better. It wouldn't have gotten us off the ship any quicker, but it would have dramatically reduced the level of anxiety, and it would have eliminated the speculation, a lot of the speculation about what's really happening, had they communicated on a timely basis.
Well, I wonder, both of you have been key leaders, right, and know how to navigate systems. And I wonder about those folks who are on that ship who don't have that type of expertise, or the connections that might help them get at least some bits of information. Like you knew some people to reach out to.
Yeah, and I do a lot of parallels to the school system. The captain's like the principal. The senior leadership is like the vice principals, and as a former principal, you know this. You tell people things. You create communities. You let people know you care about them in every possible way. None of that happened. So we started feeling like we were prisoners. Like, we were the bad guys. We thought, oh my gosh, I don't want to get off and contaminate someone. I just want to go home.
Yeah, and those of us who were at home, that's what we were seeing, right? There's these two ships, and they want to come in, and we were seeing the battles go on between different entities saying, no, we don't want them. We don't want to make things worse here and bring anything off that ship into our community. And others saying, no, these are people, there are Americans on this ship and others who need help and need support. We need to open them up and come. So that's what's going on in the background.
Right.
And of course, those of us who know some people personally who were on the ship are going, let them in. Let's go.
And, it was so hard because you knew people were sick. You knew people were dying, but you didn't know where they got it. So, a simple message of, without divulging confidentiality, I get that. But to say, if you ate dinner in the Bordeaux dining room from 8 to 10 on this night, you may have been exposed. How is that bad? If you were at the pool and had a slice of pizza, you may have been, from this time to this time.
Let us know if you're not feeling well.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and the thing about this virus that's so funky is that you can contract it and not actually have the symptoms for several days. So just knowing that you may have been exposed, not you were, not you may have. None of that happened. So you were left with sitting in a room that was very small and not knowing. And you made stuff
Wondering
up.
and
Well,
worrying
I think, it must have been those folks that came back from Buenos Aires. It must have been this. That's crazy.
I think they, I doubt that they had any of the capabilities to do the kind of tracing that experts are talking about now. That would be effective, and maybe it's okay to be critical for them to the cruise line for not doing that, and maybe we can say this was just totally unexpected, and this is new territory for everybody. I don't know, but even that too, they could have communicated with us about. Other than they periodically come and say, we don't have any information for you, but this is. These are strange and unusual times, and nobody could have planned for this. So please be patient. And they occasionally said that. It was usually that was kind of at the end of the day. And our biggest criticism is what they should have done. They should have said, we're going to be in touch with you 3 times a day, generally around 9 a.m., 2 p.m., and 8 p.m. or something like that, so that you would know that I'm going to hear it, as opposed to just wait. I wonder when they're going to get back to us, and I wonder what they're going to say, and then speculating why they weren't getting back to you within a period of time that you felt was appropriate.
So eventually you did get off.
Hey, we did.
Here we are.
And you made it back.
Yay.
Yay. That's great. So times of crisis draw, they reveal for us leadership strengths and vulnerabilities in times of crisis. You've talked a little bit about those. Talk for a minute about your own mental framework when it comes to handling times of crisis. And I'll use an example. We had Deputy Chief A.J. DeAndrea in last week, and he was talking about mental mindsets and mental frameworks that he relies on in times of leadership and crisis. But for both of you as leaders, I'd like to learn a little bit more about kind of your frameworks, your way of thinking in times of crisis, in addition to communication.
So, for me, you've got that laser-like focus on the task. You know the end game, and you know how to surround yourself with the people that can help get you where you need to go. You're prioritizing constantly, but you're also, communicating your priorities so folks know that, but you never lose that focus. You have it, and I think that's really important. When I think back to that horrible, horrible day at Columbine, I think that's what we tried to do, is keep the focus. Let's find out, this. Let's communicate that. I think that was really important. And one of the things I learned from that is that, I'm from Arvada, Columbine's in Littleton. We're all connected. Mm-hmm. And it didn't matter if there were 38 different countries, on this boat. We're all connected. We're all part of this thing we call humanity.
Say we're all human.
And so let's take care of each other. Let's problem solve together. Let's focus on the end game, and let's figure out how we're going to get there.
How about Ken? In your leadership style.
So I will probably, if I have to think back to my experience as an elected official, I go to 9/11, and that week, I was at a conference in Miami. I hadn't thought about this before. Maybe I should stay out of Miami.
There you go.
So I'm at a professional conference, and interestingly, it was, we're here at the Cable Center, and it was a telecommunications conference, and a lot of my friends from the cable industry were there. There's a big exhibition hall that had all these cable companies with TV sets, and everybody's having coffee in the morning looking at these TV sets, and all of a sudden there are all these news flashes. First, there's an announcement. It was a very bizarre announcement in the breakfast room where they said, if you are from New York City, call your office. And everybody thought, gee, that's weird. And then somebody said, looks like a plane hit one of the towers. And of course, the first thing, I grew up in that area, and the first thing that went through my mind, there's a little regional airport in northern New Jersey. And one of the first thoughts that went through my mind was, some two-engine jet clipped a wing, from Teterboro Airport, clipped a wing on one of the buildings. And then all of a sudden it hit what was happening. And it was this incredible shock for, I don't even remember how long it was. But at that point, at some point, it was, I've got to go back to my room, and I need to call my city manager. And because this is, it was pretty clear that we had this, cataclysmic event that was impacting all Americans, and in some way people all over the world, but specifically Americans. And that meant Arvada was impacted in the same way, for Jill when she was a school district employee, that our whole school district was primarily impacted at Columbine. And you struggle with, as you go through the day when this thing first happens, how it's impacting you personally. I had in 9/11, I had two kids in high school, middle school.
One in middle school, one in high school.
Thanks for the reminder. So I've got my family here. I wanted to be with my family. I've got kids who need me. I've got a wife who needs me. And I have a city who needs me.
Yeah.
And I am sitting in a hotel room in South Beach.
There's no way you're getting back.
I spent hours on the phone with different, looking at train routes, looking at rental cars. And eventually I just figured, all right, we're going to have to do this by phone and computer as best as we can. So like many cities, we had a public statements issued. We had a public gatherings issued. And and I participated remotely as best as I could and worked with my city manager and my colleagues on city council as best as I could. But what I found was it actually was hard to do at first, but then you got into a groove. You have to separate how this is impacting me personally and how this is impacting my family from what are my roles as a leader to try to convey some sense of calm and what we're doing to try to keep people safe. And remember, at that time, well, at least for those of us who were in local government, no one knew if there was another attack coming the next day.
And where it might be.
And where it might be, or what kind of infrastructure might be hit, right? We all have water systems and sewer systems, and there were lots of different ways
Power grid,
lots of different ways to sabotage various things that would cause terrible impacts in our community. So we're, on the one hand, trying to work at how do we harden all of those and ensure that we are protected as best as we can. And then how do we convey to our citizenry enough information to know that these are the things that we're doing to keep you safe in an incredibly uncertain world and uncertain environment, and that we're going to do the best we can to make sure we all get through this okay. So to sort of take your personal, how it was impacting you personally, out of it, put that in a box and store it somewhere while I focus on what I need to do for the larger organization, larger community that I represent to help them navigate through this as best as I can. And I don't know that, I can't look back and say, I did this and this was a really good thing, but I think I can look back and say, I feel in some small way that working together with the great team that we had in our organization, that we were effective and we did it the right way.
So really that servant leadership kind of posturing, both of you talked about, right? And relying on teams and communicating and over-communicating. Part of that communicating as a strong leader, I believe, is as you are navigating uncertain waters and you come up against things that weren't what you had planned and your best plan didn't work out how you had hoped it would, that as a leader, you're open about that too and say, hey, this is where we thought we were going, and admit when maybe we took a misstep, and then step back, regather your team, rethink about that long end game, and go, let's keep moving forward.
None of us are perfect, and a lot of times when you're dealing with crisis, you are dealing with something you didn't train for as much, you didn't plan for, you don't know, and you have to rely on everything you just said and then say, okay, constantly be evaluating, is this working? Constantly reflecting. But like Ken said, your personal stuff has to stay over here for a while. You're going to open that box and deal with it. But as a leader, and this gets to when you talk about intentional leadership as well, you have to be incredibly intentional about how you're moving forward.
So one of the things that the foundation is centered on is this idea of preparedness. So we might not be able to predict what the crisis is going to be, but we certainly can plan ahead for how it is that we intend to function and interact in times of crisis and practice different possibilities so that when something does happen, then we at least have the framework of saying, this is how we operate under stress in times of crisis.
And that's so wonderful that you're doing that. Thank you.
Oh, we bet. And that brings me back to a question, excuse me, for Ken. Ken, you currently are the treasurer for the DeAngelis Foundation. Talk a little bit about how you got involved and what you hope will come of the work.
Well, I will tell you, Kevin, that when I first got involved, I was not looking to find another nonprofit board to serve with. So I have to say there's really three reasons. One is Steve Bell asked. And as you know, it's hard to say no to Mr.
True.
Bell.
And Frank.
Well,
they're both hard to say
well,
no to.
well, second, Frank didn't ask. And, I experienced Columbine through Jill's eyes because she was a Jeffco Schools employee. And as an elected official, I was still an Arvada city councilman at the time. And I didn't know Frank at the time, but over the years, he has become an incredibly dear friend and someone who the more I get to know him, the more I respect him and I just think the world of him. So to have an organization that grew out of that experience and that had his name on it, pretty much made it a no-brainer that if I was asked to help, I would be willing to help. And the other thing is, because we are Jeffco people, and I have a spouse who has dedicated her entire professional career to Jeffco Schools, and my kids are products of Jeffco Schools, and they are better for it. It was something that it was just an easy thing for me to say, yes, I'd like to be a part of it. And as to what I'd like to see, I mean, then I saw who the other board members were, all people I have tremendous respect for and love to work with. And it was, as you said, the mission is preparedness. And I know one of the lessons from Columbine, there are a lot of things people have analyzed it and overanalyzed it
That's for sure.
to the point of what could we have done better. And there's, volumes that can be written on what could have been done better, differently and better. And as we've seen over the years, the threats have only gotten worse and harder to predict. So the need to be prepared to deal with those unknown threats and hard to predict threats has grown astronomically in importance. So I think the mission of what the DeAngelis Center is doing is absolutely critical. I'm not a public safety expert, but I've hung around the fringes enough to know who the people are that are experts, like Chief DeAndrea that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And frankly, one of the things I learned in the 9/11 experience I talked about in working with my city manager, Craig Koshin, who I will give a shout out to because he has been involved in multiple jurisdictions that have dealt with significant crises, is that there's a role for the elected officials and there's a role for the experts within the organization and the public safety officials who actually know how to manage crises. And one of the problems that is very easy to happen is when the elected officials overstep
Sometimes
their
they get
bounds
confused,
and get
right?
too
Yeah.
involved
Yeah.
with the actual, on the ground expertise. So to be part of an organization that is working to protect our communities and especially our school kids from the unknown threats that are out there, I know that the organization, even as a young organization, has already been successful because I've seen it. But I'm excited about the opportunities it has to become even more successful.
Thank you. So before we close, I'd like to lift up the fact that both of you continually seek avenues to support our communities through a wide array of avenues. Are there any special efforts or causes that you're working on currently that you'd like to lift up for our listeners and perhaps a way that they might get involved if they would like to?
I'm not sure about the last part, but for me, when I tried to really redefine myself after retirement, I did a lot of work for the, we have rebranded to the community table. It's the Arvada Community Food Bank. And it's so important to be able to use that community to help those in need. And I would really give a shout out to that.
I would
The
imagine
other-
that they're going to be even more busy now
They
with
are,
so
and
many unemployed
again,
folks.
trying to figure out things differently, and I think that's so important. The second thing, and I was recently appointed to the board of the Jeffco library system, and I think partnerships are so incredibly important. How the library system helps and works with school folks, and we've got a wonderful connection with that, and how we can make that happen, especially now when kids are doing more remote learning. And so we want to continue that. So I think, how do you get involved? You find the website you need to find, and there will be something on there that says, if you want to get involved, click here. And that's what you do. Or you call somebody and say, oh, hey, aren't you volunteering for the libraries? How did you start getting involved with that? What do you have to do? You just don't give up on yourself or on your humanity. I think you just keep on trying. But those two, I would say, are my heart and my soul and my passion, because they also are going to help kids.
Wonderful. Ken, how about you?
Well, I'm involved in a number of different organizations, but I think one that I would highlight, because Jill and I have always been so passionate about the arts and humanities, is the Arvada Center for the Arts and Humanities. It's certainly a crown jewel in the city of Arvada, but it has a broader reach throughout not just the region, but the whole state. And I have been serving as the board chair for the nonprofit that runs the Arvada Center for a number of years, and that was a process of transition, because the Arvada Center used to be a department of the city of Arvada, and it transitioned a number of years ago from a city department to a separate nonprofit. And that has taken a lot of work, and for the most part, it's been very successful. The city of Arvada is still a great partner in that process. But like so many other nonprofits generally, and organizations who thrive based upon having large groups of people in closed spaces these days, we are suffering. And we, like so many other theaters and similar organizations, have shut down we shut down our spring season and then our summer concerts, and now we're closed for no performances through the rest of the year. And who knows about the beginning of next year. So we have supporters who are passionate about what we do. We're trying to do as much as we can online. We have a board that is working really, really hard with our staff that is working even harder to try to navigate through some incredible fiscal challenges. Because if you don't have people in the building,
no ticket prices
there
coming
goes
up.
the revenue. You'd be, I think, pleasantly surprised to find out how many people have agreed to just donate the tickets that they had the value of the tickets they had already
speaks to the difference that it's made.
Yes. So, but still, we have a lot of work to do. And the problem is the uncertainty. People are using the phrase that Jill and I don't particularly like, the new normal. And I'll give her credit, because I stole this from her. They talked about it on the Jeffco library board. It's not the new normal, it's the next normal. Because whatever we think is going to be normal, like in June and July of this year, something could change. Are we going to have another outbreak based upon everything reopening now? Is there going to be a new wave that hits in the fall, like some of the medical experts are predicting? Are we going to shut down again if that happens? Whatever the next normal is that may get us through a couple of summer months may be very different than whatever the next normal is after that. And it's coming so fast, and it's so hard to predict. And it creates incredible challenges. So all of that is to say the Arvada Center is still here. It's still doing great things and going to do even more great things. And for people who are passionate about the arts and humanities, frankly, whether it's that organization or any other one, I would encourage them to be supportive in whatever way they can.
Thank you. As you talk about the next normal, it makes me think about, from a leadership perspective, this time we're in right now is very different from a crisis management perspective too, because oftentimes we prepare for or work through an event, and that event is typically time-bound. It might be 10 minutes, might be 10 hours, it might be 10 days, but something that's such an extended period of time with still so many unknowns, just like when you were on that boat, so many unknowns, and it changes and it changes and it changes. So I think there are significant impacts to and implications for leadership in a time like this, like we've not seen before.
Yes, and I read an article that talked about we've changed from the spring of uncertainty to the summer of discontent. And leaders are so important now more than ever, because they can help people when you're uncertain or you're discontent, you're angry, You want to get outside. You want to build a boat. You want to fly. You want to go
And that
things. We love
anxiety
to
is
travel.
just-
We want to go. Can you? What do you do? What's next? And how do you do that? Leaders are so important to help us figure that out.
Well, we appreciate both of you being with us today and having the leadership. I think there's two more things that we want to share. Jill has something that she'd like to close with us,
Yes.
but Ken has a comment first.
Well, I think it's important, and this probably relates, I know what Jill's going to say, so this relates to what she's going to say. You mentioned this, the situation that we're in right now with the pandemic, the racial justice movement that is starting to emerge. And we don't know how long that's going to take. I'm fortunate that given my work with local governments in my business, I've gotten to know a lot of our local elected officials, and I think, there's always things we can criticize them about, always will be. But I am so grateful for the local elected officials that we have all over Colorado. And for the most part, I've just been so impressed with what they're doing under those incredibly difficult circumstances and not knowing when it's going to end. And we talk a lot. I spent a long time on the phone yesterday with my 91-year-old dad who lives in Maryland with the frustration over some of the stuff that's happening in Washington, D.C. In our perfect world, we would have everybody that would be perfectly happy and grateful and comfortable for whatever leadership is coming from all of our national leaders. That would be great. We don't live in that world.
No.
And I think it's incumbent upon each of us in whatever way we can within our own community. Leadership starts with us. You don't have to be an elected official. Every one of us can try to figure out, how do I help my family get through this? How do I help my neighbors get through this? What do I need to think about to keep my head on straight as we deal with some of these uncertainties? I think we need to look internally, and then we need to recommit ourselves to do a little bit more beyond what we've been used to doing in our everyday lives. And that's how, as a broader community, we're going to get through this.
About the we, right? Not the me.
Yes. So
Jill.
I found this quote, and it just ties this all up in my mind. And it says, "Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." And I think that's so important for us as we move forward. This came from a 17th century, 18th century biblical scholar
Powerful.
guy. So I did try to look it up, and I was like, oh, I don't know who that is. But I think the words speak to me, that we're all part of the human race. We have to help each other.
So powerful and so true. Well, thank you again, Ken and Jill, for your time today and for your daily commitment to supporting schools and communities. We certainly are lucky to have the opportunity to learn from your expertise and experience. This conversation has been brought to you by the Jeffco DeAngelis Foundation. More information about the foundation can be found at www.deangeliscenter.org.